Josh Brown, there's a new Assassin's Creed. People have been waiting for it for like 17 years.
Scott Tilford, tell the people what you did immediately after this trailer drop. Tell them. Come on, it's confession time.
I like Japan. I love Japanese stuff, and I've been looking forward to a Japanese Assassin's Creed game for quite some time now. The only reason I did this is because I can cancel it up to a week before it arrives, but I've pre-ordered the collector's edition. God damn it, I haven't pre-ordered a collector's edition. I don't even know when. The Witcher 3 in 2015, and that was a beautiful game. I pre-ordered this thing with Game in the UK. No, well, shout out to them, I guess, because they exist, but they let you cancel up to a week before the thing drops. So I was like, look, there's not even any proper gameplay for this thing yet, so if it sucks, I'll take my money back. But for now, 240 bones are on the line. However, that does put my skin right in the game.
Yes, this is it, and the reason I drop you in it with all of our viewers right now is to just relay the fact that, like you said at the start, this is like a setting and a game that people have been waiting literally over a decade for now, like 15 years, half your life you've been waiting for. Japan set Assassin's Creed, and we've got our first look at the trailer, and I know you're incredibly hyped about it. There's a lot in there that I really enjoyed as well, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that everything the developers are saying about it and everything we saw in that reveal trailer is as good as I want it to be. But we'll get to that potentially negative stuff in a little bit.
We're definitely going to get to the negative stuff. I do want to cover some very positive stuff that obviously wasn't in the trailer. All they showed off was a CG trailer, and it did have some weird sound mixing issues, cutting to like different songs. There's a whole debate on whether the whole trailer should have been in Japanese, but if you go down the Assassin's Creed route, you can argue it's in the Animus, so it translates it automatically. My point is, there's more out there in regards to gameplay details that were reported by IGN, who for whatever reason were able to actually report what the gameplay is supposed to be. And it isn't a stand-in for actual footage. I'm dying to see what the thing's actually going to look like and move like. But there's a handful of screenshots, and then there are some specific gameplay details out there. Things like being able to go prone, knock out light sources. Apparently the game itself is based in an updated version of the Anvil engine, which is what Assassin's Creed's been using for the last few years. But it is next-gen only, and then lovely next-gen lighting will actually be a gameplay mechanic, kind of like in Splinter Cell. Well, you do a little face.
No, just both of those things that you described there sound like Splinter Cell. It's like, okay, if you're not going to give me that remake that you promised a few years ago, at least now in Assassin's Creed I can go prone and knock out lights and pretend I'm Sam Fisher. Unfortunately, don't have a gun, but you can't get everything, can you?
Well, yeah, you can get a gun as Yasuke, which is one of the two characters, but we'll get back to the characters in a bit. But it is things like, being able to go prone, standard features of the stealth genre that I feel have like gone to the wayside. I don't feel like we've had stealth innovation in a good long time, and I'm not saying that's what going prone is, but there is a whole thing here about seasonal stealth, and the whole idea being that you go back to different parts of levels in different seasons as the year itself plays out, and depending on what season you're in, the level will change. I love the idea of this, and I'm curious just how it plays out in terms of gameplay. But examples given are, if you go to a level in the spring, there'll be tall grass for you to hide in. If you go in the autumn, that grass will have died off a bit. If you go in the winter, a former body of water that maybe you could submerge yourself in to hide or swim through will be frozen over, so you can't use it anymore. There'll be icicles on the side of rooftops, so if you're trying to sneak by in the winter, they might drop off and give away your position. Little things that I don't feel like anyone has done anything close to in quite some time. The stealth genre itself has been dead for about as long as Splinter Cell has, and that was back in 2013. And so I'm just a bit psyched seeing this stuff. There's a light meter on the UI. Well,
nice.
Just a light meter.
A long time ago. Very Splinter Cell-esque.
Yeah.
All of the stuff that they're talking about there reminds me of the kind of environmental innovations that they were talking about when they dropped Assassin's Creed 3. And I have a lot of problems with that game, but the setting is not one of them in your interactions with it. So on paper, all of this stuff sounds right up my street. I love the idea of the open world itself being way more reactive. And looking at the developers' comments before we see any gameplay, they seem to be really stressing that idea that this is not going to be a world as big as Odyssey's or Valhalla. In fact, they described it more closer to the scope of Assassin's Creed Origins, which was, still a big world, but a little bit smaller. And I want to see that density in the environment itself. I want it to feel like a living, breathing world, because the issue that I've had with Ubisoft's most recent open world games is that they've lost that element of believability for me. They look gorgeous, they're incredibly well researched, but in terms of, navigating them as a player, they often feel like they're designed to kind of, progress through at quite a rapid rate. When I was playing through Valhalla or playing through Odyssey, it was like you go to a section, you do the gameplay stuff, you move on, you kind of forget about it, you know what I mean? Whereas for me, when I love an open world, it's the sense of familiarity. It's the sense that things are changing. It's the Rockstar open worlds,
right, okay.
where you kind of feel time moving. You feel the seasons changing. You feel like you're having an impact, or you're actually living in a world and not just moving kind of from level to level in a sandbox, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the pace that you would go from location to location and across the last few Assassin's Creed doesn't do right by the art departments, the R&D departments, the historical accuracy that's in there. I do think, and I've thought this since Assassin's Creed Unity, even though it does predate it, but AC Unity's depiction of Revolution era France was just so detailed, and I remember seeing various artists on Twitter sharing the insides of various buildings, just showing how ornate and beautiful those locations were. And I do think Ubisoft are world best when it comes to depicting a given piece of history, and when it comes to historical accuracy. There was that whole thing when the cathedral in France burnt down, the Notre Dame. I think it was the Notre Dame, and they actually had all the 3D scans from when they had worked on it, and they were able to say, look, use this. And same thing for when there was a tomb that was discovered in a pyramid in Egypt, and they were like, hey, we found that on our scans. And it was just, nice. They do such good work when it comes to depicting a piece of history. And as someone who loves Japanese stuff and Japan in general, that's one of the reasons I'm mega psyched for it.
Well, that's another great thing I thought the developers were talking about, because they've always nailed that part of it, right? Like, you can literally do a historical tour around most of the recent Assassin's Creed games, and
they added like a museum mode or whatever.
Yeah, literally, right, and be educated on the authenticity of what they're trying to display. I liked what the developers were saying, and I think it was an IGN interview where they were talking about, with this game, they want to merge the gameplay with the environmental design way more and have them inform each other a little bit more, rather than having like a gameplay set of systems and then a world design ethos and kind of have them butting heads or be a little bit separate. So that idea of the more reactive world combined with the attention to detail that Ubisoft has always produced, think of whatever you want of their games, always produced when it comes to Assassin's Creed, that, again, they're saying all the right things, Scott. I'm going to have to see it in motion, but I'm like, don't disappoint me, please.
The thing is, like, having played every single Assassin's Creed since the very beginning, like, the double-edged sword of Assassin's Creed stuff, or Ubisoft stuff in general, is you know what you're getting for better or worse, and that for the most part got very boring, and we all got very sick of that same tower-based map unlock template for so long, and that might be the same case here. But like I said, the flip side of that is that all we were waiting for was to do an Assassin's Creed in Japan, and so if they can just nail that in one of the most straightforward ways possible and make it as satisfying as something like AC Origins or whatever, then that'll be awesome. Some more gameplay stuff. They're ditching the owl drone or the flying drone that was in the last few Assassin's Creed games. And when you climb up towers, they're not going to do the 360 rotary shot anymore.
Right.
They want you to climb towers and then mark stuff on the map and then go down and explore. Which is a whole debate down in the fan base, like just how iconic the spin is when you climb something. At the same time, that was always something that was brought into how the Ubisoft template, and maybe that was something they needed to get rid of. Hilariously, IGN's report mentions a new enemy type, which is a patroller that will call for reinforcements. I feel like that was a new enemy type in like 2003.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but I guess Assassin's Creed hasn't had... I mean, they had them in Far Cry, where they'll run and hit their alarm bells and you've got to try and stop them. But you are using Eagle Vision to go through various locations and stuff. It's not, tagging a whole bunch of enemies and going that way. So either way, a lot of this stuff seems like it points towards a dedicated stealth game for at least half of it, which brings me on to the characters. We have two playable characters, kind of like in Assassin's Creed Syndicate. You've got one who is more stealth-based. In Syndicate, that was Evie Fry. And then it was Jacob Fry in Syndicate that was more brawler and melee and would just punch stuff. In this game, you've got Yasuke, which is based on a real-world dude who apparently was originally a slave that came across to Japan. He was taken in by Oda Nobunaga and made a samurai over time. But I love the whole idea of taking Yasuke and doing something with him, because in real life, there's hardly any records of him that go into much detail. There is stuff about his time under Nobunaga and that he was made a samurai by Nobunaga and given a homestead and a sword and everything else. But then once Nobunaga died, that seems to be where the records free up, and that seems to be where the game's set, where it's like, okay, he then went off and did all this stuff, which I love that as a setting. I like the idea in Assassin's Creed lore of just taking some real world stuff and poking and prodding at it. We've always had that in past games. And now we're actually going to play as someone. To round off the character stuff, you also play as Naue, who is a female. She's a female shinobi. She's the daughter of Fujibayashi Nagato, who's a real ninja. I love that idea as well. I love the idea of either you could go down the stealth route or you going to go down the samurai brawler route. I'll not be doing the brawler stuff. I'll be a ninja. But what do you think of them doing both sides, given we've had Valhalla in the past and then more ninja-y stuff in the past?
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's really interesting to finally get a proper differentiation between the two characters in terms of play styles again, because I know you have been able to pick your protagonist in the past couple of games, and that has changed the story in a few different ways, especially in Odyssey, but I like that there seems to be this more pronounced distinction here where they're two very different characters with very different combat styles and very different motivations, it sounds, even though they are teaming up. I love the designs of both of them. I like that, you've got one more dedicated stealth character versus one more dedicated, I hope, limb chopping character. And the thing is about this historical time period is, like, I am such a novice when it comes to Japan stuff. Like, I don't know anything. Those names that you reeled off there mean nothing to me. But the appeal of Assassin's Creed is that, again, I'll be educated on this stuff, right? I'll be able to go into this game and find out something from that blend of history and fiction. And I think that's very cool, especially with a time period, like you said, that we've all been kind of clamoring for. From the CG trailer, I'm already into these characters, and I do think that this is the team that made Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I really like the character writing in that game. I still think Cassandra is one of the best Assassin's Creed protagonists, especially of the past few years, and to be fair, we've had some really good Assassin's Creed protagonists recently as well, so I'm hoping both of these characters live up to that caliber and give us a meaty story hook alongside everything else. I will say, going on from some of the gameplay details that you kind of talked about there, this is where I'm a little bit more negative because, hey, I like going prone in stealth games. I like having a light bar. Enemies that call more enemies, sure, I've seen it. All of this stuff sounds all right, but
about 20 years ago.
That's it, right? It reminds me a little bit of when they were talking about, hey, there's a dog in Call of Duty now. Isn't that cool? My least favorite part about the recent Assassin's Creed games are the way that they've felt and the way that they've played. I think the combat can be satisfying, but especially in Valhalla, which I just thought was way too bloated for what it was, I found that it got very repetitive towards, the back half of that game. So I'm hoping that at the very least, these two different styles of gameplay allow it to maintain a sense of freshness for the entire duration. And hopefully it just, I don't know about you, but I just feel like from the parkour to the combat, there's like a sluggishness, I find, to the more recent Assassin's Creed games, and that's kind of in part because they've adopted a more RPG style approach to the mechanics, and the combat is good for an RPG, I think, but for an action game, I don't know. In an era where we've had Ghost of Tsushima and Rise of the Ronin, which I know you're less hot on, kind of already do an Assassin's Creed in this setting kind of have beat Assassin's Creed to the punch. I'm interested to see what this can bring to the table that those games haven't already kind of made standard.
Yeah, man, well, there's a ton of Assassin's Creed DNA in Ghost of Tsushima. Like, obviously, the more stealthily you play, it feels like that. Ubisoft are in love with their animations. Kind of like in Stellar Blade, like there's a distanced feeling to the impact of certain things in something like Stellar Blade, where you have an art department or a coding department who are absolutely in love, and they should be, with these beautiful animations. They just want to show you how well mocap they are, etc. And I think that's been a problem with Assassin's Creed quite a lot over the years. Like, I mean, people have different favorite combat systems. I quite like chaining stuff together in AC2, or the parry-based finishes of Black Flag or whatever. I don't mind my assassin being this walking death machine, and if you get close to me, I'll do a cool finisher. But at the same time, to mention Valhalla, that thing felt so sweeping and treacly and just kind of a bit naff. And it's interesting seeing them do such like opposing characters. Like, you have a stealth character that's old school Assassin's Creed, then you have a melee-based samurai, which assumedly will be a little bit more like Valhalla, where you're encouraged to just take enemies on. In the trailer, Yasuke literally just seems to be battering down doors and has a giant club and whatever. Not what I'm going to an Assassin's Creed game for personally, so I'll be playing as Naue. But they have said that some missions you can pick and choose. There'll be some missions that are specific to each character, so I'll have to play as him at some point. But it's on them to make both styles enjoyable, and it's not like they don't have stuff to pull from when it comes to Sekiro or Tsushima or whatever. One other thing to throw in regards to just the way the game will play out is that you do have a home base. You can make your own katana. You can look after a whole faction of shinobi, which is really, really cool. You know, at this point, Assassin's Creed's been going for so long, and they have so many ups and downs to pull from. One of the biggest ups being AC Brotherhood. So if you're going to do the whole micromanaging a team of assassins thing, you might as well do that with the shinobi. So that's a lot of the good stuff.
I've got one more thing that I want to talk to you about. I don't know if you've got this written down in the cons or the negatives or whatever, but I was reading that IGN piece where they were interviewing the developers and they were talking about how the structure of this game is going to be more open.
Yeah, non-linear.
And I don't know how I feel about that, because the idea seems to be that rather than follow, you still got quests, but you're essentially hunting down a bunch of targets in this open world kind of Assassin's Creed 1 style, but on a bigger scale. And it's up to you kind of how you take them out, how you find the information and the intel to accomplish those missions. I think in theory that could be really good and really fits an Assassin's Creed game. However, I've seen this in practice before in other Ubisoft titles, in what comes to mind as Ghost Recon Wildlands, which I liked as a game. I think it was really good, especially in co-op, but the structure of the main missions made everything feel like a little bit flat. So I don't want to see that flattening across the board, because the main issue of many that I've had with the recent Assassin's Creed games is that it goes for this kind of breadth of content while losing depth, and I don't want to see them kind of spread their systems and mechanics too thin across this game. That's what I hope they won't do with what they're talking about, with it being more in line with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but I can see that idea of this open main narrative structure going well, but judging on their previous games, I just hope they've learned the mistakes and the pitfalls of that structure and can implement it here in a better, more engrossing way.
Honestly, one thing I forgot to mention was that you do have a physics-based grappling hook, literally like Spider-Man. If there's one thing Ubisoft loves doing, it's looking at another game's mechanics and go, we should do one of them. So you can swing around these different worlds and stuff. But that's the way that that's described, that whole non-linear thing, where you have different targets in different locations. And because we have the whole seasonal stealth thing, the idea of going back to land masses over and over again and seeing them change, reminds me so much of Tenchu, because Tenchu would be a series of locations and you would revisit them from different angles, spawn in different places, have different targets, but really get to know those spaces, and different shortcuts, different ways to get the drop on enemies. I absolutely love that. Another thing that's mentioned in regards, when we think of the grappling hook, is that you can shoot it straight to the ceiling and then hide on the roof.
Oh yeah,
which I've not been able to do in a stealth game since like Tenchu Z, and that was in 2009 or something.
Can I do the Spider-Man thing where like you can just come down like this?
That's the professional way to do it. I mean, that's what they should motion capture. But in theory, you can do some sort of rooftop hanging based kill, which I want in more games. I've not snapped a dude's neck upside down since Chaos Theory. Splinter Cell.
This is it. We've talked about Splinter Cell so much in this news video so far, and I hope this is like setting the groundwork for that remake or for that continuation that we're going to get, because so many of the mechanics in this description just scream Splinter Cell to me, and it's like, yeah, I want to see this be implemented across the board, and I want to see stealth come back.
Yes, same. I'm too nakedly cynical when it comes to big business, especially in the industry right now, where part of me thinks they've just taken the ideas for a new Splinter Cell and put them in this instead. It is mentioned in the IGN report that this game, Assassin's Creed Shadows, has 15 support studios, and Ubi has, I think, 28 worldwide. So that's almost the majority of them working on one game.
This is probably a conversation for a different time, or the podcast, which you should definitely check out wherever you get podcasts. But Assassin's Creed just is a Call of Duty now, right? Isn't it? Like, it makes as much money, it practically has as many microtransactions as Call of Duty, and it's worked on by every team inside its own publisher. Like, that 15 support studios, I think a decade ago would have sounded crazy. With a franchise of this scale, it's like, I don't necessarily love it, but this is what it takes to get these games over the line for as quickly as they come out. Yeah,
plus also, I mean, they need to knock this out of the park when it comes to a Japanese Assassin's Creed. It's by far the most requested location. It always was. Way back in the original AC1, in the scene where you finally get to see the Eagle Vision stuff, they showed like a Torii Gate or a Japanese temple or something like that. I remember that back in 2007. That's how long we've been waiting for it. Mentioning microtransactions though, and keeping things afloat, is a good pivot into the bad side of this stuff. A few negative points for the game so far. One being that it has a mandated online connection, even though it's only single player. The reason being, according to Insider Gaming's Tom Henderson, and this is me connecting the dots, Tom Henderson reporting that the game has various 20-level battle passes called projects that are tied to in-game cosmetics and other unlocks. AC Shadows is also going to be tied to Assassin's Creed Infinity, which is something we've talked about before, but AC Infinity is their big umbrella launcher type thing. It's kind of the Call of Duty HQ of Assassin's Creed. They want to have some sort of big launcher thing where Assassin's Creed games will launch from, but they haven't fully detailed it yet. Lots of leaks have mentioned the idea of all the modern day stuff, the idea that you're putting the Animus on and then booting into different time periods, happening inside Assassin's Creed Infinity, and then you would boot into whichever game you chose. But a lot of the microtransaction stuff and these projects or battle passes or monetization over time, etc., assumedly will come from Infinity and then plug into whichever game you then launch, with Shadows being the first game of this new mandate, however it shakes out. But so far that's being being mentioned. So that's a lot of the negative stuff, and I do not doubt that Ubisoft will milk the living hell out of this, because Shadows is by far, and the Japanese setting is by far the most requested thing. So they will only see what they can get away with until enough of us say, hey, that sucks, and then they might have to pull things back. Yeah,
totally. It's definitely a tale of two stories, this announcement, Scott, because on the one hand, I look at Assassin's Creed Shadows, and while I'm not all in, I think this has a lot of potential. This could be a very cool game. On the other hand, I know that it's attached to Assassin's Creed Infinity, will probably be the big launch push for that live service hub thing, and it makes me think, oh no, an Assassin's Creed live service sounds not good. What the hell are they going to add into this game? Like you said, there's already been talk about those mini battle passes, the fact that you need an online connection to play it or install it at all. All of that, very bad, not good for the consumer in any way, I don't think. But I can see why they've done it. Assassin's Creed Valhalla was the first Ubisoft game in general, actually, to make $1 billion. And that's not just from sales, that's because that game, for whatever reason, had a bunch of microtransactions in it tied to the armor system and the weapon system, and it also had the DLC as well. So, I can see how they've got from one point to the other, but like you alluded to, Scott, I don't want them to say, well, we made $1 billion last time, how do we push our luck and try to make $2 billion or $1.5 billion and just throw all of these extraneous stuff in there.
It's also going to depend on, because if you go back to Assassin's Creed Origins, there was that one merchant who would sell you the rotating store of stuff, and then over time I feel like microtransactions are weird in Assassin's Creed. I never feel the pull to use them, but they are right there on the menu, the hex credits or whatever the hell they call them, the premium currency. I've never bought that stuff. I've never felt any pull to do so. I never liked them in my games anyway. I feel like you've always got to skew some sort of in-game balance towards getting that coinage at some point. I personally have always just battled through with whatever the game was that didn't make me do that, but it's always it just ends up inviting that question of is this game actually fully enjoyable or intended without this stuff? Is it truly optional? Because obviously they always say that it is. And like I said, in this particular time period with so many cosmetic options and everything, they're only going to try and charge as much as possible for that. There's at least 2 expansions announced so far anyway. You get them with the collector's edition, which I may or may not have pre-ordered, and going from there, they're only going to try, like I said, and put as many additional price tags on there as possible.
Yeah, that's it. I don't want to sit here and be hypocritical, because if you recall, or if you watch those videos that we did on Dragon's Dogma 2, I sort of defended those by saying, look, I don't like them. I wish they weren't in there, but they don't impact the game. And so far, that's been the same opinion I have of Assassin's Creed. Right. I think that they haven't impacted the actual game. They're loot-based, but you get so much loot in a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla that you never feel encouraged, in my opinion, to interact with the microtransactions in any way. They are entirely optional, but like you said, across the board, I wish they weren't there. And I do think that I can see Ubisoft getting the confidence to say, well, they were optional back then, but what if we push people towards them a little bit more? I can't say one way or another, but I'll have to see what happens when the game actually comes out, and fingers crossed they are as ignorable as they were in the previous titles.
Yeah, it's so far, I feel like Shadow's reception has been a bit mixed. I feel like because they led with a CG trailer, there was a general backlash to that. There's lots of conversation around the various pieces of real-world history that a character like Yasuke, a real-world person like Yasuke, is then up for interpretation or whatever. There's a whole conversation around that. Personally, I'm just so glad we're finally getting this setting. I love the idea of what they're doing with Yasuke, and I hope that all works out in the story itself. But then you also have the underlying Ubisoftness of the entire project, where you just can't fully trust them at all. I just wanted to be excited, so here I am. I'm hoping for the best, goddammit.
Scott Tailford, when June 10th comes around and you get the first gameplay reveal, you don't cancel your pre-order. I really hope that's not on the cards for you.
That is on them.